Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Baltic Scouting Podcast. We are now officially just 8 days away from the 2023 NFL Draft. It feels like it just flew towards us. I really didn't see it coming, and now we're right around the corner. So, rumors are swirling like crazy. We kind of have an idea of what could happen, but at the same time, we don't really have an idea because what I've noticed is everything we thought we knew 3 weeks ago, we don't know anymore. So who knows when the picks are actually, if anything we think we know today will happen.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost the least clear that it's been in the past few years, kind of at the top.
Yeah.
Um, I don't remember last year when the Trayvon Walker thing really came to a head. That was maybe
That was the week of the draft. There's kind of a
the week of.
tendency in the NFL draft for the dust to settle really in the final couple days. So who knows? I mean, we might get some more clarity next week, but right now things are looking murky in the first few picks still.
Oh yeah, I mean, let's start up at the top.
Mhm.
Since the Panthers made the trade up, everyone was kind of under the impression that it would be C.J. Stroud going first overall. And then I think kind of within the past, week and a half, Bryce Young has really become the leader in the clubhouse, and it almost seems like a foregone conclusion at this point that Bryce Young ends up going first to the Panthers.
Yeah, I think at that point, that's a lock. I think we can already say right now that the draft starts at 2. And that's where it's absolutely fascinating because we started to hear the whispers that maybe the Texans won't go quarterback, and I couldn't believe it. I thought that when you're in a dire need of a quarterback and you have a quarterback prospect as good as CJ Stroud, you make the pick. And let's say you're not all in on CJ Stroud and Bryce Young is the only guy you thought is worthy of that high of a pick. Then I would think that you would have had to have accepted the Bears' offer to move up to 1, which the Bears wanted to do so that they could get an even bigger haul, moving from 1 to 2 and then 2 to 9. Yet here are the Texans sitting at 2, and the reports across the league seem to be that they're going to pass on CJ Stroud, and they are making calls to move down. So, what do you think ends up happening with that second pick?
I
Do you think it's true, or do you think they stick, or do you think they end up managing to trade down?
I really am not sure.
Yeah.
I To me, it just makes sense to take C.J. Stroud just because I was a big fan of him as a prospect. I know you were as well. I think he has franchise quarterback potential. But I think it was Dane Brugler that I heard talk about it. Either yesterday or Monday. And he was saying that he knows people in the Texans offensive coaching staff that don't think CJ Stroud is worthy of the second overall pick. I know there have been plenty other guys to say that they probably or may not be taking Stroud at 2. But that was like the most detail that I heard was from Brugler saying that specifically about people inside the Texans offensive coaching staff. So I'm starting to lean away from Stroud and go to one of the defensive ends. And then what's interesting is a week ago, if everyone said nope, the Texans are not taking Stroud, we all would have thought they were taking Will Anderson.
Yeah.
But now it's come up that no, the Texans might have Tyree Wilson above Will Anderson, which I think they're both really good prospects, really good players. I do have Anderson ahead of Wilson, but it's just been a crazy week from what we're hearing about the Texans.
Yeah, absolutely. I would think that they'd end up being able to find a trade partner, either them or the Cardinals. I find it hard to see CJ Stroud slipping to the Indianapolis Colts at 4, with the Titans really having explored all the quarterback options and having made some of the calls already. I think they would be looking to come up. Raiders would too. And if I was the Colts and I was hearing this, I would be I don't think you could do it with the Texans because it's a division rival. But I'd be telling the Cardinals, look, if Stroud's on the board at number 3, we will give you a pretty high pick to move just one spot over any of these other teams where you'd have to be sliding towards the back end of the top 10 or even out of the top 10. You can pick the same guy you were going to pick, either Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson, and we secure CJ Stroud. So I'd be interesting to know whether the Colts are considering that option or not.
Yeah, but the Texans are in a tough spot trading back from two, in my opinion, because the two top teams that we've heard that want to move up for a quarterback are both in the AFC South. It's the Colts and the
Yeah,
Titans.
that is
So
true.
if you're the Texans, you don't want to trade with a division rival and give them a potential franchise quarterback. So is there another team that you can think of that might be a dark horse to trade up to
I think
for
the
a
Raiders.
quarterback? The
I don't think
Raiders?
the Raiders are going to force a quarterback pick, but I could see some interest from their part on moving up for CJ Stroud.
Yeah, I you know what? Now that you mentioned that, I do remember reading somewhere that they were late to the conversations of trading up to first overall. So I think that does make a lot of sense, and it makes sense for the Texans as well because that prevents the Colts or the Titans from trading up to 3 and getting CJ Stroud.
Yeah.
So if I were the Texans and I was set on not drafting Stroud, I would try to convince the Raiders to come up and get him, just so you don't have to deal with Stroud as a division rival.
Yeah. At the end of the day, though, I feel like very often we think trades are going to happen and they don't end up happening at the very top of the draft. And then you see a lot more trades happening once you get to the end of the top 10 and throughout the rest of the first round. But very often, these first few picks on draft day, they're not getting traded. So let's say that's the case. Who do you think goes 2 and who do you think goes 3 to the Texans and the Cardinals?
I mean, I think if no trades happen in the top 3, I think it's Bryce Young and then Wilson and Anderson in whatever order you want. I
Well,
think those are the
that would be the question.
yeah. Right now with the momentum kind of leaning Tyree Wilson, I think right now if you made me make a final mock today, I'd probably put Tyree Wilson there.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then Will Anderson at 3 to the Cardinals, and then the Colts get their pick of C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, or Will Levis. Apparently,
Yeah. Man, in that scenario, I find it really hard to find landing spots for the 2 quarterbacks that slide past the Indianapolis Colts. And presumably, the Colts would pick CJ Stroud. And then you're looking at Richardson and Levis. And we had a very interesting report from Tony Pauline, who said that the top 2 quarterbacks are on the Raiders draft board are Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, and their QB3 is actually Hendon Hooker. And that they would probably pick him at pick 38 in the second round or move back into the first round for him. So let's say Stroud's not available anymore. That certainly seems like they would be out of the running for Richardson and Levis. And at that point, there has also been a report from the Titans. I think Lance Zierlein said this, that he doesn't think they're going to be picking a raw player in the first round, be at any position. And so you would think that maybe all these efforts to trade up are for CJ Stroud, and if they miss out on him, maybe they'll be passing on quarterbacks. And where are these guys going to go if they get past the Raiders and the Titans, which seems quite possible? You're left with Richardson and Levis still on the board, and I can't really find a landing spot before the Bucks at 19, the Vikings at 23. So I think at least one of these guys is going to free fall on draft night.
yeah. And honestly, I've heard rumors of both Levis and Richardson. I think the Seahawks still might be a sneaky team.
Ooh, yeah,
I
that'd be
think
interesting.
at 5, I think if they love one of these guys, specifically Anthony Richardson, I think they could be a dark horse to take a quarterback. But yeah, it's a really interesting thought because you start looking down the draft board, and then the next team that kind of has a quarterback need is Washington. Could Washington take Anthony Richardson or Will Levis if they're there at 16?
They could, but it doesn't sound like that's the direction they want to go in. It sounds like they want to give Sam Howell a shot.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think then you have Washington, you have Tampa Bay, and then I think another team that's been rumored to go quarterback towards the end of round 1 is possibly the Vikings.
Yeah, I could definitely see it, especially if one of those guys is still on the board.
So yeah, I mean, it'll be really interesting to see where these quarterbacks go. For a while, there were people saying, "Oh, we're going to see 4 quarterbacks in the top 10." I do not think that happens. I really never thought that was going to happen,
Yeah,
just because you rarely ever see that.
yeah,
So yeah, now it's looking like we might have one quarterback go in the top three. When we thought it was a lock that a quarterback goes 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's pretty unbelievable. I think another interesting talking point is where in the end Bijan Robinson lands because he's one of the most talented players in the draft class. We're gonna have so much fun watching him play on Sundays, but just who is that going to be? And one team that's really emerged to me is the Washington Commanders. When you've
Oh,
got
okay.
a coaching staff that probably looking at that offense and wants to give Sam Howell a shot, but at the same time they've got to know that with an inexperienced quarterback, that offense might struggle. So what better way to help that quarterback get along than to give him one of the most talented young running backs in the NFL right on day one, and that would be Bijan Robinson. So I'm starting to think that because I can't really find a clear landing spot above the Commanders, I think he's going to be there for them, and I can see them pulling the trigger.
Yeah. Honestly, I never really thought about the Commanders taking Robinson, but it really does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
They have a decent offense around Sam Howell, but they don't really have a star running back. Obviously, Brian Robinson, a great story, and he's a good starting running back. But Bijan Robinson is, I think he could come in and be a top 6-7 running back in the league, year one.
Yep.
So I think that would really help Sam Howell, and it does make a lot of sense. I just think I think it makes too much sense for the Eagles to take him at 10. I
Man,
know
Howie Roseman just won't pick a running back that high.
I disagree. I think we think that Howie Roseman won't pick a running back that high. I think Howie Roseman makes the pick that he thinks is gonna impact that team the most and make that team is gonna have the best opportunity to make that team better. And I think Bijan is that pick for the Eagles at 10. I just think it makes too much sense.
I think it makes sense. I just don't think it's going to happen because we see a lot of general managers just stick to their historical trends. The Packers have just historically not picked wide receivers in the first round. Howie Roseman doesn't pick running backs or linebackers in the first round. And these things just, even though very often we think it would make sense to deviate from it and we expect it to happen like the Packers last year in the first round with a wide receiver, they tend to just not deviate from it. And while I think that Bijan would definitely upgrade at 10 or I think first of all, the Eagles might look to trade down because they only have 6 picks in the draft. But if they stick there, I think they would look at Peter Skoronski as someone they can plug in at guard to replace Isaac Seumalo. And the best teams in the NFL, they are routinely reloading that offensive line, and that's why they remain the best teams in the NFL. So I could see them going in that direction, or I could see them loading up on the defensive line with a guy like Lucas Van Ness, Nolan Smith if he's there. Howie Roseman loves to build up the trenches, and I think that's what he ends up doing in this first pick.
He does, but they're in their Super Bowl window. And I think what do you think they could have won the Super Bowl if they had Bijan on that offense?
Yes.
So why wouldn't he make that pick?
Look, I agree with you that I would make that pick. I just don't think he will.
I think he's clearly a very smart general manager. We rag on him again and again for the Jalen Reagor pick. He has made great move after great move after great move, great contract signings, and when he makes a mistake, he's not afraid to admit it. Yep. I just think he's smart enough to realize that this Bijan pick could take us over the hump and win us another Super Bowl.
It's a fascinating storyline for sure.
It
and
really
one last note on Bijan, I think one thing that makes it really difficult to project where he goes is that he is such a clean player on tape and off the tape in terms of the character reports that you're going to get from the people who know him and the team sources, which means that teams aren't going to feel the need to bring him in for a top 30 visit. Even if they're strongly considering him in the first round, they just aren't going to need to use one of those 30 visits on him because he's just such a safe prospect. So you can't really just look into the visits and predict where he's going to go based off on that, which you can for some other players.
Yeah, I think I kind of want to talk about the wide receivers a little bit.
Sure.
We know this isn't, a great wide receiver class. And kind of the reports that we've heard from a couple people, including Tony Pauline, is that there's kind of 2 wide receivers that are set in stone as round 1 picks on Jackson Smith and Jigba. And honestly, a little bit surprising to me, but Quentin Johnson was the other one mentioned.
Yeah. Even though other people have said he might not go in the first round, and the NFL didn't invite him to the.
Yeah, so that's what's really interesting. So Tony Pauline said those 2. The NFL it's rumored that they didn't invite him to the draft because they didn't want to have an awkward situation where he falls to round two. Um, so which wide receivers do you think end up going in round one?
Well, I'll start off with Johnston. I think the reason he said that is because the Kansas City Chiefs would pick him at 31 if he's
I
there.
agree with that. I agree with that.
He could fall. He could go earlier, is what I meant to say. But I think if he's there, the Chiefs are going to add him. They've been rumored to be interested in him, and it would add up with what Tony Pauline said. Otherwise, I think Jackson Smith-Njigba will be the first one off the board. Though I used to be confident that he was going to be going in the top half of the first round, and now I'm not certain on that. I think he could go to the Texans at 12, but I'm not certain about that. And if he slides beyond the Texans, Patriots are a possibility, but they signed Juju Smith-Schuster to play in the slot. The Packers are absolutely a possibility, but are they going to buck that trend that they don't pick a wide receiver? So if he falls past those couple teams, I could see him going, Seattle at 20, Los Angeles at 21, Baltimore at 22. He'd be swooped up pretty quick in the 20s, but I'm a little torn on whether Smith-Njigba goes 12 to 15 or in the 20s. And then outside of that, I think Zay Flowers comes off the board in round one as high as the Patriots at 14, or else he can go. The Ravens really like him reportedly. And I would say the last wide receiver to get in, Addison slides in too. Maybe the Giants at 25.
Yeah, I agree with those four. I was ready to write Jackson Smith-Njigba in pen to the Texans at 12,
Yeah.
assuming that CJ Stroud was going there. Again, it just makes too much sense.
Yeah.
But now that we're hearing that the Texans probably won't go Stroud, it's like, well, I'm not going to guarantee them Jackson Smith-Njigba now because I was just making the connection between quarterback and wide receiver. And the Texans have plenty of needs. So they really could just go best player available at 2 and 12.
And DeMeco Ryans is going to want to build up that defense.
Yes. Yep. All right. So, moving on to some of the teams that we haven't heard a lot of rumors about.
Yeah.
Specifically, I think that the two that I've heard the least about, the Falcons and the Jets, which is really surprising because every year I think we really hear quite a bit about the Jets, and this year it's really been pretty much radio silence, other than the fact that we think that they can offensive linemen.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. But I'm not sure that Joe Douglas wants to take another tackle because to me that admits that he missed on Mekhi Becton. And that was his first pick as a general manager, and he made up for it last year with the draft that the Jets had. But I mean, he had Mekhi Becton as his first round pick and then Zach Wilson. I'm not sure that he's willing to give up on Mekhi Becton yet, which makes me question a little bit whether they take another tackle in the first round.
I think you could take a tackle without necessarily giving up on him. I mean, Dwayne Brown is getting up there in age. Max Mitchell isn't really a sure thing either. So even if Becton pans out, you would have another spot for the other tackle. But honestly, I think that people connecting tackles to the Jets have just been out of assumption rather than reports that they specifically like player X or player Y. So that's why I'm open to the possibility that they could go in a different direction. And as you said, super interesting that we haven't heard much about them. I feel like that we heard them specifically connected to certain players last year, and now we're not hearing anything. This is a really out of the box pick, but are we going to say that a wide receiver room of Garrett Wilson, Corey Davis, and Alan Lazard precludes them from picking Jackson Smith-Njigba at 13 when they're going to be bringing in Aaron Rodgers and have every reason to make him happy and to provide him weapons to score points on the field? And they already hit a great home run with an Ohio State wide receiver last year in Garrett Wilson, and Jackson Smith-Njigba could be every bit as good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that wide receiver room precludes them from doing that because, I think Corey Davis has been rumored to be part of the Aaron Rodgers deal because the Packers want a veteran wide receiver in that wide receiver room. So Corey Davis moves out. You're pretty much left with, Alan Lazard as the other wide receiver next to Garrett Wilson. And Alan Lazard is not, a top receiver in the league. He was pretty much solely brought in because of Aaron Rodgers. So, maybe in 2 years when Aaron Rodgers is gone, I think, Alan Lazard might be gone too. And then if you have Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith and Jigba as your two wide receivers, they're your top two wide receivers. I think that makes a lot of sense and it really leaves you with a really strong wide receiver room.
Yeah, absolutely. And those two guys on rookie contracts too would really open up some other areas of that team. So I think that, potentially you could see them going in that direction. But other than that, what were you thinking for the Jets at 13?
I wouldn't be surprised to see an edge rusher. I
Okay.
think they have Jermaine Johnson, who I think he's a really solid player. I think he kind of got lost in the shuffle in year one, but outside of that, they have some older veteran guys that could end up becoming cap casualties next year. So I would not be surprised to see them take a guy, possibly like a guy like Nolan Smith if he's there. Um, Maybe even Lucas Van Ness might make sense. I'm not a huge fan of that pick at 13, but I think he might be a guy that Joe Douglas likes. And as we mentioned, Howie Roseman likes building up the trenches. Joe Douglas is from Philadelphia. He also likes to build up the
Yep.
trenches. So I think a defensive end edge rusher makes a lot of sense for the Jets at 13 as well.
I can see that. So now moving on to the Falcons at 8. Originally, it seemed like early in the process they could be targeting a tackle because Caleb McGarry was set to hit free agency, but they ended up bringing him back. So now they've got Jake Matthews on one side, Caleb McGarry on the other. Those tackle spots look solidified, and they've been rumored to like Pierre Skoronsky. So the question is, do they like him quite enough to draft him as a guard as high as the 8th overall pick? So I think that's interesting. And we thought maybe cornerback, but then they went out and got Jeff Okudah, and I don't think they're just getting Jeff Okudah for a 5th rounder to be a depth piece. I think that because of how talented he was coming out of Ohio State, there's been some reports that his struggles were really due to some issues with confidence. Maybe a new setting could really get him to click. I think that they could potentially look away from both those positions. Maybe they go an edge rusher, but what are you thinking for the Falcons?
Yeah, I think probably defense. I think, like you mentioned, they solidified that offensive line. I guess I still wouldn't be shocked if Skoronsky was the pick. I know
Yeah, me
a
neither.
lot of teams, value him very highly as a guard. And, 8th overall might be a little bit high. But if,
Yeah.
they really want to go through the run game, they have a good running back in Tyler Algier, who was a rookie last year. I think, continuing to build up that offensive line. Obviously, you have Desmond Ritter, who they seem to be willing to go with there. So I think if you build up a strong offensive line, Skoronsky, I wouldn't be shocked. But then I think either edge rusher or maybe cornerback, I guess. Nolan Smith has seemed to be a guy that's been pretty popular to mock to the Falcons at 8. What do you think
Yeah.
about Nolan Smith?
Yeah, actually, that's who I would put right now if I were to make a mock for the Falcons, just because we don't really have any player team connections for them. I think Nolan Smith would make a lot of sense.
What
On the
about
topics,
quarterback? What
what about
about
a quarterback?
because I
I
did
would do
read
it,
somewhere that if the guy they liked fell, they would take him,
but
but
I
they're
think
not.
that would have to be Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, and it's not going to happen.
Do we know what if they're in love with Anthony Richardson?
Look, they could be, but I think everything we've heard is that they're probably not going to go quarterback, and they're going to give Desmond Ritter a shot.
I agree. It was just something worth bringing up just because
Yeah, I agree.
it's been pretty quiet from the Falcons, and once in a while when you hear that or when you don't hear that and it's silent, they might be trying to stay quiet because they want one of these quarterbacks and want one of them to make it to 8.
Yeah. Yeah, I honestly, if I was them, I would be trying to trade up for CJ Stroud, but they might not be going in that direction. I just wanted to circle back to Peter Skoronsky because I find it really interesting that we found out in recent days through a few reports that he's probably viewed as a guard in the NFL. And there was always some talk that he might be best at guard, but I kind of thought it was like his former teammate Rashawn Slater, where there was some talk about it, but ultimately he was going to be drafted to play tackle, and he was going to play tackle. But now that he's being viewed as a guard reportedly, I'm just not entirely sure he's going to go quite as high as he's being mocked. Sure, the Falcons could pick him, maybe even the Raiders or the Eagles could, but it's not just that you're picking a guard in the top 10, you're picking a player who hasn't played that position. So it's you're picking a player at a devalued position who is switching to that position. I think it's really hard to justify doing that in the top 10. And don't get me wrong, I think Skronsky will be a good player. I think his value is more in the teens than the top 10, and I would keep him at tackle actually, but I think he can be a very good guard as well. But I'm just thinking about it from that perspective. I'm not sure he goes that high, and if Rashawn Slater slid to number 13 and he was going to stay at tackle, I think Skronsky maybe could slide into the tens. What if he goes to the Packers at 15 and that's where his slide stops? I think it's possible.
Yeah, I mean that does make a lot of sense. I think if teams are planning on playing him at guard, I think we definitely see him fall down the board a little bit. I think you know, probably the mid to late teens to early 20s, probably just because again the guard position isn't super highly valued. So I wouldn't be shocked to see a little bit of a slide from him due to that position change. Talking about another devalued position along the offensive line that seems to have be kind of popular to be talked about as a pick at the end of round one. We have the center position in John Michael Schmitz, and now I think we've heard a little bit about Joe Tippmann, potentially becoming a first round pick, just because there's a few teams that really need centers, and Tony Pauline said this that there's not enough centers to go around in this draft. He mentioned the Jets, the Giants, the Seahawks, and even potentially the Steelers interested in a center in round one. So do you think we end up seeing a center go in round one? Do you think there's a possibility that there's two? What do you think kind of happens there?
Yeah, I think that we definitely could see a center go off the board in round one. The Seahawks could definitely pull the trigger on Tippmann or Schmitz. Where I think it gets really interesting is what if there's a situation for the Giants in which they're picking between Schmitz and Addison at 25, because we've kind of heard some reporters assume they're going wide receiver and they like Jordan Addison. Others are like Tony Pauline are pushing, that center need is just as big, if not bigger than the wide receiver need. Maybe they're going to go with Schmitz there. So I wonder who they'd pick between the two, and potentially that could be the path towards two centers in round one.
Yeah, I would think they go wide receiver just because they don't really have a great wide receiver in that wide receiver room, and you paid Daniel Jones all this money, so I would hope you get him more weapons. But again, they're in need of a center, so I wouldn't be shocked to see one go there. Anything else you kind of want to? Any other rumors you want to bring up and talk about before we wrap this up? 7 days before.
Honestly, just a general rumor that we've heard multiple people say that this is going to be, the craziest draft yet. There's going to be some real shock picks where we're going to be floored by what happens because teams view this draft very differently. And I don't fully doubt that, but at the same time, haven't we heard that each of the last 3-4 years?
We hear that every year.
Every year we hear this draft's going to be crazier than the last ones. So, I actually wonder once again, is it actually going to be even wilder than the last few years, or is this kind of just the norm? The NFL draft's unpredictable. Mocks are never going to be fully right.
I think it's both. It is the norm, which is what makes it fun. We do see a shock pick, at least one every year. I think Cole Strange was that pick last year. The year before was Peyton Turner with the Saints.
Yeah.
So we're bound to see at least one. But I think the reason people are saying that, which I kind of agree with, is because I think there's less first round talent than in years past.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what's making teams' boards so diverse. And a player that one team might have at 60 or 65, another team might have at 30, and if they're picking at the end of round one, that could end up being the pick. So I think that's kind of where that's coming from, and it does make a lot of sense because I agree with that sentiment of less first round talent than in years past.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, we're a week away. It's going to be one incredible ride. And honestly, what we think is going to happen today is probably going to be different than what we're going to be putting in our final mock drafts next week, which is something you're going to be able to see Thursday morning. We'll be finalizing that Wednesday night. It'll be up on our Instagram Thursday morning. And then, we're going to be enjoying the draft. It is honestly my favorite night in the NFL calendar. Call me crazy, but I'm a draft Nick, and I prefer it even to the Super Bowl, which sounds ironic because you're picking these guys to win a Super Bowl. But I just love the draft. So much drama, so much anticipation finally coming to fruition, and it's going to be a good time.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out our Instagram. We'll wrapping up our positional rankings and then also our rumors, which will be posted again on Sunday. And then again, I think the Wednesday before the draft. So be sure to check that out. And we'll be back with another episode soon.